Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. There was an awesome back and forth. Let me check my volume. I hope everyone is doing okay while I check my volume. Always check your mic. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Awesome debate between Linsday. One more thing. Vanessa Beasley is going to be here at Thursday at 9 a.m. That's the journalist. She was in Syria. The woman is amazing. Well, I'll let her say it. I can't say it. But she's going to be here at 9 a.m. So that should be pretty damn interesting. Her reporting has been amazing in Syria. And being one of the few people who've actually been there, I would like to talk to somebody who's actually been there. And George Galloway responded to me and said that he'll be on my show. Fucking awesome. I don't know when, but I'm going to contact him very soon. So those are just two notes that I have for today. This one is going to be slightly long. I'm not going to say short because the video itself is a little bit long. It's like 15 minutes long. Rand Paul gets into a floor match with Lindsey Graham on this thing of use of locking up American citizens without having the Bill of Rights apply to those American citizens. Meaning, I can take you and I can put you in a prison, I can throw away the key and go have lunch. And you can be in that prison for the rest of your life. We've not given you a trial or anything else. You just have to trust that whoever put you in that prison was right when they put you in that prison. You don't get a lawyer, you don't get a trial, you don't get squat. Lindsey Graham is here making the argument that that's okay. Rand Paul is making a point of saying that is not okay and that the Bill of Rights should apply. Meaning at the very least, before you lock somebody into a prison for the rest of their life, they should get a trial. You need to know that the person who you're locking up is the person that you're locking up. If that makes sense. We tortured several human beings. And many of those human beings were completely innocent. Gina Haspel, the one who's in charge of the CIA right now, she broke and ripped apart a guy who ends up not even being a member of Al Qaeda. What are you scared of, Lindsay? If they did what you say they did, you should be able to demonstrate that they did what you say they did. Beyond that, Bin Laden should have been dragged back to the United States and put on trial. There's something weak to me and cowardly about sneaking up on a guy and shooting him, canoeing him when he's in his underwear or something. It's not that I'm not necessarily saying pity for the Bin Laden. That's not it. I'm making this somewhat of a saying on justice itself. Do you believe that a person who committed a crime should be brought back to the place of that crime, serve trial? Yes. I understand people say, oh, dude, the threat of this, the threat of that. He committed a crime. He committed a grievous crime. And he should have been held accountable for that crime. And I wanted to be a little bit more than him getting shot in the head. I want him dragged back into New York, in the well of New York, in the place where the crime was committed. That's what I want. And, by the way, I want it to be demonstrated that he did it. I don't like this stuff of killing and murdering people in the shadows or taking people to black sites and breaking these people apart. You have to fully trust that what the government does is right. And you should have enough sense, if you have a memory that goes beyond an hour, that that's usually not true. It's not that government can't do good stuff. It's that government doesn't murder people well. Or at the very least, it doesn't murder the right person well. Let's take a look at Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, having a go in the well of the Senate. What I will say, though, is this is politics that I like this. And Rand Paul is not being incentivized to get up and do this. Nobody is telling Rand Paul to do this. Nobody whispers in Rand Paul's ear and says, hey, you need to go out there and pretend that you're something for a particular constituency. He does this because it's in him. It's in him. It's what he believes. Now, this is not this thing of me holding up Ron Paul as this awesome person. He is awesome as a libertarian on certain issues. Meaning, on issues of locking people up unnecessarily, militarism, he tends to be pretty damn good on. He tends to be pretty damn good. This is somebody who believes it against somebody who's nuts, who the public should be very wary of.
One of the greatest things about our country is the Bill of Rights. You know, when we passed the Constitution, many people were fearful that if specific rights were not enumerated, they might be taken away. I think other people said, well, we don't need a Bill of Rights. Who could imagine a time when we would take away the right to trial? Who can imagine a time when you wouldn't get a lawyer or that you could be held indefinitely without a trial? So some people opposed the Bill of Rights and said, we don't need this because it's so obvious that no one in their right mind would ever argue that an American citizen or someone apprehended or accused of a crime in the United States would be held without limit, would be sent to a camp in another country and held forever without a trial. None of our founding fathers ever imagined that could happen. And yet here we are. Here we are at a time where just 4 or 5 years ago, this body passed a bill that says that an American citizen can be detained forever. That an American citizen accused of a crime in the United States could be sent to a foreign camp and held forever without trial. When you mention to this people are incredulous. They're like, who is the person that would object to the Bill of Rights? Who is it that possibly objects to the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment? Well, you're going to hear from that person shortly, because it's one person in the U.S. Senate that objects to the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment applying to those who are accused of a crime in our country. Captured in our country and accused of a crime in our country, this person would deny you a lawyer. This person believes that the entire world is a battlefield, including the U.S., so we need to have martial law. Martial law in the United States. This person discounts the whole presumption that you are presumed to be innocent until found guilty. Why is this a problem? Well, after 9/11, we captured 119 people and we tortured them. Our government tortured them, but in retrospect, we found out that 26 out of the 119 were the wrong person. Does anybody remember a time in our history when black people were lynched because they were presumed to be guilty? This is what this is about. This is about people accused of a crime, not declared guilty, not found guilty, but you're willing to lock them up without a trial? I cannot think of anything more un-American. You will hear from today the representative of the un-American position that the Fifth and the Sixth Amendment don't apply to everybody. Now, some will say, oh, the Fifth Amendment just applies to citizens, and maybe we could talk about citizens but not non-citizens. The Fifth Amendment says no person shall be held or deprived of their liberty or due process. That means the whole idea of going to court. Nobody captured in this country can be deprived of that. The Sixth Amendment says in all prosecutions, the accused, not just American citizens, the accused. Now, people will say, but oh, we're talking about terrorists here and they're terrible people. Absolutely, they're terrible people. Everybody would want to punish the guilty terrorist. But do you want to punish people only accused of terrorism? You say, well, oh, it's a terrible crime. We might as well just throw out the Constitution, throw out the Bill of Rights, and why don't we just lock these people up, or better yet, kill them? That is the mentality of lynching. That is the mentality of locking up all the Japanese during World War II. Is that who we are as a people? They will have won after 9/11 if we give up on the Bill of Rights. If we give up on who we are, they will have won. We presume people to be innocent. We don't lock people up because they're Japanese, not any longer. We don't lynch people because they're black, not any longer, because the Bill of Rights applies to everyone. But if you say, well, he's accused of terrorism, he shouldn't get a trial, or she shouldn't get a trial. We've had 386 people accused of terrorism in our country. Every one of them have been convicted. The man who killed 13 people in New York City the other day, if I'm on the jury, I vote to convict. But I want to hear the evidence first. I want to know they got the right person. I want to know someone saw him do it, that there is evidence. Not just because he has brown skin, we're going to lock him up and lock him up forever without a trial. We've convicted everybody tried in the United States. We didn't give up on who we are. And yet the law currently says, thanks to several individuals, says that you can be detained forever without a trial. Now, President Obama signed this law, but even President Obama knew that it was a terrible law. He said, this law and this power is so terrible that I will never use it. But that's not what the law is about. The law is about being so good that even when you get a rotten person in office someday, they don't have the power to do this. What happens if someday we elect someone who is a bigot, or someone who says gay people should be guilty, or someone who says brown people or non-Christians or Christians or homeschoolers, you name it? You can be a minority of the color of your skin or a minority of your ideology, but we should never let the government lock you up without a trial, without a lawyer. My amendment that I've been trying to get for 6 years simply restates the Constitution, restates the Bill of Rights. It says that no declaration of war will allow people apprehended in the United States to be held without a trial. We not only can't get this passed, we can't get a vote on it because certain individuals have such disregard for American tradition, disregard for the presumption of innocence, and disregard for the Bill of Rights, they object to even having a vote. So we've been trying for 6 years to have a vote on this. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order to call my amendment, which would forbid indefinite detention of American citizens and others who are accused of a crime, Amendment 2795, to be amended to Amendment 2282.
Is there objection?
Reserving the
Who can argue with that? There will be one. Lindsey Graham, Chicken Hawk head himself. Lindsey Graham is going to make a case, and his case is going to boil down to kind of what Rand Paul said: the world is a battlefield. And because the world is a battlefield, we can grab whoever we want to grab and put them in a black site and throw away the key. I'm perfectly okay with that position. That's essentially his point. I'm okay with doing this. And I'm trying to justify why I'm okay with doing this. And Lindsey Graham sees no issue at all. Like, look, intuitively to me, Rand Paul is right. But let's hear Lindsey Graham, who's terrified the world is out to get him.
Senator from South Carolina.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'll try to be brief, and I appreciate Senator Paul's passion. He's been doing this for 6 years. I think he's been wrong for 6 years. And let me just say something. There's a reason I'm not talking about eye surgery on the floor. I don't know anything about it. You're talking about legal concepts you clearly don't know anything about. You're fighting a crime, I'm fighting a war. If it were up to Senator Paul, there'd be no difference between a criminal and a warrior. Radical Islam, in the form of ISIS, they're not trying to steal your car or break in your house, they're trying to destroy your way of life. So if you believe we're at war like I do, we should apply the law of war. For 33 years, I was a military lawyer, a prosecutor, defense attorney, and a military judge. I think I know the difference between fighting a crime and fighting a war. When it comes to fighting a war, if you capture somebody who's part of the enemy force, Senator Paul, the last thing we worry about is how to try them. We want the...
How do you know? How do you know? That's the point. That's the point that you're fundamentally missing. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know they were part of the enemy force? You capture somebody in the United States. They're in Florida. Under his analogy, You can grab that person, put that person in a black site, and throw away the key. The world goes on. How do you know that the person who you captured and put in a black site is the person that's actually guilty of the crime that you're accusing them of? That's what you're missing. Or at the very least, that's what you're completely overlooking or not caring about. But let's keep going. Everything's a war to Linsday Graham.
To hold them under the law of war to gather intelligence, to make sure we understand what this person knows about any enemy operations. We had 450,000 German and Japanese prisoners in the United States. Guess what? Not one of them had a lawyer. If you had said what he just said in World War II, they'd run you out of town. Most Americans would find it odd that a Japanese and German prisoner of war would be entitled to a lawyer under the...
This is nonsense. You're not... Come on. This is nonsense. Like, this is not even that good of an argument. You're not in a full-fledged war. If you were in war with Russia, I think people will understand. You're Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, North Korea. All those countries lined up against you. You have your allies. You guys are going into a full-on war. I can understand that to some degree. I mean, I think you would have essentially given up everything of these ideas of democracy and everything else. But a case can be made that in Britain during World War II, that for the most part, these ideas of democracy and everything else have been curtailed. Definitely in the United States, where they were locking up people in World War I. They locked up Eugene Debs. I'm making the point that that's not the situation to which you find yourself. This is not World War II. They're not Nazis on that door. They're not Japanese NRCs. What the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about? You guys have this contrived war, quote unquote, on terror that's been going on for the past God knows how long, and you're acting as if there's no difference, or there's a difference, or that the quote unquote amorphous war on terror is the same thing as having Japanese at your shores and the Germans at your door. They're not. They're not even close. Let's keep going.
Bill of Rights, because they're not. We're fighting a war, and I'd like to win the war sooner rather than later. When it comes to killing the enemy, that's part of war. But if you're lucky enough, clever enough to capture one of these bad guys, the last thing I want them to hear is you have a right to a lawyer. You don't. Under military law, no enemy prisoner.
You don't know if it's the right person. You don't know if it's the right person. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know that the bad guy that you caught was the actual bad guy? And to make this point clear, the United States under Obama, I think last year, 26,000 bombs, or the year before last. In many of those bombing strikes, especially when you're talking about Iraq and Syria, 90% of those people were civilians. Innocent civilians. The military didn't know. They didn't know who they were bombing on the ground. They didn't know who they were killing. They didn't know who they were murdering. And I'm supposed to believe that they grabbed some random guy on the streets that they, with the knowledge of this kind of God omnipotent knowledge, is going to always get the right person. This is nonsense. Linsday Graham is coming up with this contrived idea of a war and is using it as a power grab to be able to lock up whoever Linsday Graham wants to lock up. This is nonsense. Imagine the scenario with Donald Trump. People protest Donald Trump, and the people get locked up in the protests. Let's say maybe they step on the street, maybe they take a picture of a cop or something to that effect. And Trump says those people are terrorists. Those people were causing a riot in that particular area. Those people were terrorists. You've constructed a legal apparatus that would literally allow a bunch of cronies in the governmental system itself to have easier ways of locking people in black sites. Your argument as to why this should take place is because the Germans and the Japanese during that war, people wouldn't have considered them criminals. They would have considered them soldiers. Okay, I get that. But oftentimes you just call Al-Qaeda terrorists. Who are we at war with? I mean, there is no governmental body, for the most part, that you are at war with. This is nonsense. This is a nonsense argument. But let him finish. I'm not going to...
Has a right to a lawyer. You're talking about fighting a crime. I'm talking about fighting a war. There are 44 people in Gitmo that have been held for over a decade that will never see the light of day because they're part of the enemy force. They've had due process under the law of war, and they're too dangerous to let go. They're not going to be tried in federal court. They're not going to be tried by military commission because they're too dangerous to let go, and we have no interest in a trial. We have an interest in keeping them off the battlefield.
And you know they're the right person because Lindsey Graham told you so. And Lindsey Graham would never lie to you or tell you things that were untrue or wrong. Lindsey Graham has omnipotent knowledge, and you can absolutely trust what Lindsey Graham is saying, that those people are absolutely guilty. And you know that, so much so that you didn't need a trial and you didn't need any sort of justice apparatus to make sure that those people were who they say they were. Forget the fact that we've tortured innocent people. Forget the fact that we've bombed and drone bombed thousands of innocent civilians. They're going to get it right this time. We can trust
them. They will die in jail without a trial. That's what happens when you join Al-Qaeda or ISIS. You can get killed or you can die in jail. So if you're an American citizen thinking about joining ISIS, don't. You're not going to be captured because the color of your skin or your religion or your political views. You'll be captured because you've turned on your own country. In every war we've ever had, American citizens have unfortunately sided with the enemy. Guess what ISIS is trying to do as I speak? Recruit people in their own backyard. How many people have bought the propaganda over the internet? The two guys in Boston, one of them had permanent status. They bought into this crazy construct that you got to kill everybody in the name of religion. The guy who ran over the folks in New York. All these people have one thing in common. They were radicalized by the enemy. They became soldiers of the caliphate. So here's what I'm trying to say. It's not my view of the Constitution that I want you to look at. It's what the Supreme Court has said. In Ex parte Curran, a 1942 case, it involved capturing German saboteurs in Long Island. Now, the last time I checked, Long Island, New York is part of the United States. You had American citizens collaborating with the enemy. They were captured as a group. The American citizens were tried by military commission, and one of them was executed. Why? Because under the law of war, once you join the enemy, your American citizenship doesn't protect you from the consequence of your act. N. Ray Curran said, citizenship in the United States of an enemy belligerent does not relieve him of the consequences of belligerency, which is unlawful because it is in violation of the law of war. In 2009, an American citizen captured in Afghanistan fighting for the Taliban. There is no bar to this nation's holding one of its own citizens as an enemy combatant. For those who understand the law of war, this is one of the timeless concepts. He's trying to turn the war into a crime. Now, I agree with Senator Paul. If you're charged with a crime, you can't be held indefinitely and questioned without legal representation because you're being accused of a crime and you have rights as a criminal defendant. When you become an enemy combatant, you have rights under the law of war, and there is no right for an enemy prisoner to be given a lawyer.
Does the senator from South Carolina object?
I object. And I had so much more to offer, but I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr.
The
President.
senator from Kentucky.
I think it's important to listen to what you heard and analyze what you heard because apparently if you're defined as an enemy combatant, it would be okay not to have a trial, not to have a lawyer, and you wouldn't be presumed innocent, you would be presumed guilty. But the question you have to ask is who gets to define the enemy combatant? So if the government gets to define you as an enemy combatant, is it not conceivable that you could be an enemy combatant because you are a minority, either of skin color or of ideology? Has it happened in the past? The Japanese citizens were minority, but there was no evidence. No one presented any evidence that they were a threat or had done anything wrong. The Non-Detention Act attempted to fix this. There were people like this back in the time of World War II. There are people like this in every war who are frightened of those who would attack us, so they want to give up a constitution to make it simpler to get to guilt. You don't have to have a trial, you just proclaim people guilty. If you proclaim someone an enemy combatant, there will be no trial. But it begs the question, who gets to decide? Are you going to let one person decide, or are we going to have a jury? Imagine how important this is to our country. We should be alarmed that there are people trying to prevent a trial by jury in our country. It hadn't been used so far, thankfully. We have actually 386 times taken terrible, awful, rotten people who have tried to attack us. We tried them in courts with juries. We presumed they were innocent. We found them guilty, and we punished them. See, the problem isn't about how terrible terrorists are or terrorism is. Murders are equally as bad. I mean, we had somebody go in a nightclub in Orlando and kill 125 people. He's as evil as any terrorist we've got out there, yet he will get a trial. Not because anybody condones what he does, not because anybody doesn't want to punish him. We give him a trial because it's part of who we are. It's part of America to have trials. You short-circuit America. You short-circuit American history. If you get rid of a trial by jury, if you get rid of presumption of innocence, it doesn't mean you have any sympathy for the guilty. But we've got to make sure we get the guilty. We can't just sort of prosecute people because they have brown skin, because they have black skin, because we...
Understand why he keeps saying that. Because they are talking about the same thing, but they're talking about it in different ways. Rand Paul is making this point that the reason you pass laws is not so much because of the way things are in the best of times. It's more so to prevent things from getting to be the worst of times, or in the worst of times, that the worst things don't take place. It's like if you allow a law to be used in a particular way, the law is going to be used in a particular way, assuming that nobody will be horrible enough to use it in that way. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. I've asked the question before. What would Obama do if Obama, was head of North Korea? He would act like Kim Jong-un. What would he do if he was in Saudi Arabia, Syria? He would act like the leader of that particular country. The powers that you get, they tend to use. Presidents don't tend to give up powers. As they accrue more and more power into that office, at some point, you're going to find somebody who's going to use it. The point that Rand Paul is making to you is pretending as if we are in constant war so you can continuously use certain powers. Look, whether the person is brown skinned, whether they're, people saying, oh, that guy's a little Ruski, that guy's a communist, that guy's a Russian sympathizer. That's the lens to which I look at this now, where Democrats have been scapegoating Russians and been in this kind of weird xenophobic area from the standpoint of Russia. One of them getting in office and then starts articulating the powers in the legislation for them putting in prison people who are Russians or people who were supportive of or pushing back on the Russian nonsense, if that makes sense. I'm trying to make this point that any group, any demographic, any belief system can be scapegoated. And the idea you're going to allow a president to have powers where he can make a determination, or the justice system to be able to make a determination that a particular group is somehow a quote-unquote terrorist, when that distinction is purely just a distinction. That guy's an enemy combatant. I'm not looking at that guy's a criminal. He's an enemy combatant and put him in prison forever. That's a distinction that anybody can make. And I'm making a point to you that putting somebody in office giving them the power to make that distinction is a problem. Rand Paul's argument is not so much that Donald Trump is doing this now. It's you will get a lunatic in office that will articulate these powers, and they will use those powers in a way that was not necessarily intended. Obama's saying these powers are too terrible. They're too terrible. But I'll accept them. Yeah, that's great for him to say they're too terrible. Somebody else may not. So I agree with Paul on this. Let's let him finish. He's almost done.
We don't like the way they act. We don't like their religion. That's what comes of a country that doesn't have trials. Look around the world. There are countries that don't have trials. That's not who we are. We cannot be so frightened of terrorism that we are going to presume guilt and have no trials. It will end up in tyranny. And so I ask again and again, and I won't ask it now because he's left, but I ask again and again, will this body not allow a vote? This isn't even about him voting no. It's about him objecting to even the democratic process of the Senate allowing a vote. So America needs to know there is one opponent in the Senate who does not believe in the Bill of Rights. When he declares you an enemy combatant, you don't get the Fifth or Sixth Amendment. That's what this is about. And I'm happy if he wants to go home and defend that. But this is a very important debate and should not end here.
I don't think he's going home and defend it. He's probably not even bringing it up. Rand Paul is right. Rand Paul is right. Nobody's telling Rand Paul to act this way. Nobody is whispering in his ear. Nobody is calling him up, pushing him. Rand Paul gets up in the morning. He puts his underwear on. He puts his pants on. And he is just that way. There's a difference. That's somebody who believes it. So, good floor speech. I like it. I like it. You think between Linsday, I do declare, Ramsey graham crackers, and Jefferson Keebler elf Sessions, they'd make a tastier arguments against warmongering. To be fair, you lose the first, Fourth Amendment too. Right, because essentially we've shut you up by putting you into a black site. I'm always amazed by this. Like, Rand Paul is making this point, like, anybody can be declared an enemy combatant. You understand that. He's like, in the rules of war, you got to be able to declare people enemy combatants and they don't get a trial, blah, 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 blah. It's like, you're literally saying, I am willing to take Americans and put them in a black site and throw away the key, and we don't even need to give them a trial to make sure that the person who was locked up was right. Lindsey Graham. So, I'm not going to keep this one long, because I have another one I want to do after this. So, let's see. They also said China and Russia are new threats. Yeah, but they haven't declared war on China and Russia. We haven't declared war on anybody per se. We have that authorization of military force. But look, there's a difference between being in war with Japan and Germany versus not. And this idea that you're using war terms and examples from a situation where we were in an existential threat for Europe and our country, it rings hollow. It rings hollow. Now, you may say, well, there's a difference between an enemy combatant and a person. Fair enough. But like you said, who's making that determination? And that's just the quirk of an ink pen. So, yeah, he's insane. I like this, so I'll end this here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys. And we